What's good, everybody? Nick Johnson, favorite sports YouTuber here, back in here with another video. I'm gonna be doing something new because of the news that I received yesterday. Which I should have talked about and touched on yesterday, but I just didn't have the time to. And considering how frustrated I am with this whole pandemic going on, I just thought I'd cool down you know, before I even made this video. So I'm gonna take a break on the basketball teams, at least for this video, and touch straight on the news that I got yesterday, or rather this past weekend. Now, I mentioned how COVID-19 is really starting to piss me off, and in more ways than one. It has claimed two more notable people this past weekend. Of course, we all know Tiny Lester Jr., better known as Deebo from the Friday movies with Ice Cube, and a former WWE wrestler under the wrestling name Zeus, back in the day with the WWF, when it was the World Wrestling Federation. Back in the 80s, wrestling against Hulk Hogan and whatnot. Yeah, he passed away from COVID-19 related symptoms, and it was just really tragic. So, and for those of you who are wondering about any Friday remakes, you can forget all that. It's bad enough that you already lost John Witherspoon a couple years back, I think. Now you add Tiny Lester to the mix. Now he's gone, so any chance of a Friday remake is dead shot. You can just forget that because ain't nobody play those two characters better than they do. You know, you know, Willa Jones, Deebo, Deebo. Sorry about that. I'm trying to do AJ Johnson voice. You know, Izelle. But yeah, um, it's just unfortunate. So rest in peace to Tiny Lester. We gonna miss you, man. On screen, you were a jackass in Friday, but outside, I'm pretty sure you're like the most lovable and respected human beings ever. And you're like everyone's favorite neighborhood bully. As weird as that sounds, that's just how we remember you guys. That's just how we remember you, John Witherspoon. Nothing could ever take the greatness that y'all gave us away from y'all. And with that, rest in peace to Tiny Lester. We will miss you. Hopefully we'll catch up on the joint up in heaven, dude. We love you, man. And I, I just want to throw that out there because I know I'm uploading this on a sports channel, but it's also sports related. The other person I'm going to talk about is Pierre Lacroix. Now, this is the first time I've said anything hockey related in like months, since like post Stanley Cup Finals victory for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Mentioned about the NHL draft, but I just never really touched on that, and I apologize for that. But yeah, I got news yesterday that Pierre Lacroix was also another victim of COVID-19. Now, like I said, this is the first time I've ever seen anything hockey related in months. But if you're a hockey fan, a lifelong hockey fan, even from back in the day in the 2000s or in the 90s, you pretty much know who the name Pierre Lacroix is. If you're that, so. But it's all good if you don't. But I'll give you a rundown for those who don't know. Pierre Lacroix was a former general manager in the National Hockey League. More notably, the general manager for the Quebec Nordique / Colorado Avalanche. But mainly the Colorado Avalanche, because the first season that he got there, when they were still known as the Quebec Nordique, up in Quebec, Canada, they were already in their last season over there in that city before they moved over to Denver, Colorado, here in the States, where they became known as, officially today, the Colorado Avalanche. Since then, you know, Lacroix was already there when the franchise drafted the likes of Joe Sakic and Peter Forsberg, amongst everybody, and Mike Keane and company. But 1 year after the Quebec Nordique moved to Colorado to become the Avalanche, that's when his flurry of trades and his transformation from like a little known GM all the way to arguably one of the greatest general managers of all time. Throughout his entire tenure with the Avalanche, he put together a Stanley Cup championship juggernaut from the mid 90s to the early 2000s, especially with his handful of blockbuster deals to bring in certain Hall of Famers in. Of course, let me give you a rundown. Their last season in Quebec as the Nordiques franchise, they were the number one seed in that short lockout 94-95 season, and they were the number one seed, dominating team, but they still got upended at the hands of the eighth seeded and reigning Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers in the first round. So New York took care of Quebec in the first round, and that was the end of the Nordiques franchise. They moved to Colorado, become the Colorado Avalanche. They're still like the same unit as before, but like goaltending became a clear-cut issue. And that's when the early months, rather around December of 1995, is when he forever changed the fortunes of the Avalanche franchise for the greater good. It was in that time, it was in a game that was unrelated to the Avalanche when Hall of Fame goaltender Patrick Waugh had a horrible game, arguably the worst game of his career against the Detroit Red Wings. He was playing for the Montreal Canadiens at the time, and he had a problem with then head coach Mario Tremblay. After allowing an embarrassing 9 or 11 goals in net, he ends up finally getting pulled and told the member of the Canadiens front office, "I just played my last game in Montreal. I will never play for y'all ever again." And from there, that's when Pierre Lacroix, whose Avalanche team needed help at goaltending, pulled off a blockbuster move, sending Andrei Kovalenko and Justin Deebo and a couple other pieces to the Canadiens in exchange for Patrick Waugh. And with Waugh's arrival, the Avalanche became a legitimate Stanley Cup contender, and later on that year, they would go on to win their first Stanley Cup in franchise history. That was the first of a handful of trades that he would make to solidify them as a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. Years went by, he pulled off another blockbuster trade in the 2000 NHL trade deadline, trading for Hall of Fame defenseman Raymond Bourque from the Boston Bruins, who spent his whole career with the Boston Bruins but never won a Stanley Cup to help him get to there. They added him, they got to the conference finals but lost to the Dallas Stars in 7 games. And then the following year, in the 2001 trade deadline, the Avalanche were the best team in the NHL, but needed to solidify that as a result. So he ends up making another blockbuster deal with the Los Angeles Kings, my Los Angeles Kings, giving us Aaron Miller and Adam Denmarsh in exchange for our fan favorite, all-time King great and Hall of Fame defenseman Rob Blake to the Avalanche, sending him to the Avalanche. And from there, the Avs with Blake and Bourque, Sakic, Forsberg, Waugh, and a young Chris Drury, I remember. A lot of names to remember, but I remember them very well. And they would go on to win a Stanley Cup, in which we all remember as Raymond Bourque's coming out party, as he would finally win his first Stanley Cup after 22 years in the league without winning one. And the Avalanche maintained their position as arguably one of the greatest teams in the National Hockey League until after that last Cup win and another trip to the conference finals the following year in 2002, in which they lost to the Detroit Red Wings in 7 games. The Avalanche would slowly tail off from championship contender to just a mid-level playoff team, and Patrick Waugh's retirement in 2003 pretty much solidified that. And of course, Lacroix would hang it up for good in 2006 after I think the Avs missed the playoffs. But yeah, to me, that was the legacy of Pierre Lacroix, one of the greatest GMs in NHL history. These blockbuster trades that he made, the signings, the overseeing the development of Forsberg and Sakic, pretty much tells you how brilliant of a mind this guy is. And outside of his final years in Colorado, his final year in Colorado, we're not going to include the 04-05 season because that season was canceled due to a lockout. So his final season, 05-06, the Avs will miss the playoffs entirely. Outside of that, he guided the Avs to the playoffs every single year since his arrival, to giving them 2 Stanley Cup titles as a result. That to me was the legacy of Pierre Lacroix. I remember that vividly. I even still watch old clips and videos on YouTube because of that. You know, he was a brilliant mind. And of course, I send my deepest condolences to Lacroix's family, to the Avalanche fan base, and members of that organization, because we all know how much that man meant to the organization as a whole. So, once again, rest in peace to Pierre Lacroix. And earlier, as I mentioned, rest in peace to Tiny Lester. This whole COVID-19 pandemic is just out of control, and hopefully we'll get this over with soon. Because as of today, we have a first boatload of shipments of the vaccine to combat this virus, and has already been sent to the hospitals as we speak. So pray to God that this thing pulls through, and hopefully it'll be enough to hopefully turn the tide in this battle against the pandemic. So once again, rest in peace, Tiny Lester. Rest in peace to Pierre Lacroix. We love you guys, man. And that's all I have for in today's video. And let me know what you think in the comment section. And what are your favorite memories of those two guys? So, and as a result, that's all I have to say. No added instructions needed. You know what to do. So that's it. Peace out, guys.